I hope he's not in the chair. He was in the chair earlier. Does anyone mind if I take off my mask to speak? If you do, raise your hand and I won't. Okay. Okay, so thank you for being here. A Happy New Year to one and all. I'm joined by Senators Klobuchar, Merkley, and Padilla, and we hopefully Senator Warnock as well. So look, we all know on Thursday we're going to observe a dark, troubling milestone in this country's history, and that's the one-year anniversary of January the 6th. That day, thousands of rioters, egged on by a disgraced former president, waged a violent insurrection by attacking the U.S. Capitol. And January 6th was not a random event. It did not materialize out of the blue. It wasn't just a group of people being swept up by the moment. January 6th was an effort, a result. January 6th was the result of an effort by Donald Trump and his supporters to delegitimize our elections and perpetuate the big lie. Trump couldn't stand it that he lost. He couldn't deal with it. So he came up with the big lie, and unfortunately, he's had so many people across America join him in perpetrating that lie for their own, usually bad, malicious purposes. The election subversion efforts we're seeing all across the country today are a direct continuation of January 6th and the big lie. They come out of the same thing. They're all directly related to the same anti-democratic poison as the big lie. People invaded the Capitol because of the big lie. Republican legislatures are changing the rules and preventing poor people, people of color, people who live in cities, older people, disabled people, young people from voting. It's not aimed at everybody. It's aimed at particular groups, and we all know to achieve political advantage. Republican state legislatures are promoting the big lie to justify disenfranchising legitimate voters. And the violence that we saw on January 6th, we're seeing throughout the country by the same types of people. Local legislators, local election officials are being threatened. Some have police guard simply because they stand for making a legitimate count of the vote. And people want to threaten them away from doing that, just as Trump wants to threaten people away from believing the election results. So if we don't act now, my belief is the big lie will threaten the very future of our republic. And if you have any doubt where Donald Trump wants this country to go, look at who he endorsed yesterday, Orban, a dictator who is infringing on democracy in Hungary. That's where Trump is headed. And that's where this country will head if we don't take action and prevent what's happening throughout the legislatures. As I said in my dear colleague yesterday, if Republicans continue to hijack the rules of the chamber to prevent action on something as critical as protecting our democracy, then the Senate will debate and consider changes to the rules on or before January 17th, Martin Luther King Day. Democrats for months have tried to bring Republicans to the table. Joe Manchin, we delayed moving forward because he wanted time to convince Republicans. He had several months. Republicans wouldn't even debate the bill. When we asked them what their proposals were, they wouldn't put anything forward. And it's well known in our caucus and McConnell's caucus, in the Republican caucus, that McConnell said it's a bottom line. No one should cooperate on voting rights. So there's not going to be any kind of bipartisan action. We know that. Our caucus is now engaged in active discussion about how we can restore the Senate. Senator Manchin, and we're engaged in discussions. But if Senate Republicans continue to abuse the filibuster to prevent this body from acting, then the Senate must adapt, as it has before. Changing the rules, there's nothing new. Robert C. Byrd, who was always protecting the Senate, changed the rules more than 9 times. Jeff Merkley has done a great job documenting all of that. And Byrd said that changes in the rules must be changed to reflect changed circumstances. So we're going to move forward. We're going to have our vote on the 17th, and hopefully we can have, it's an uphill fight. I don't want to give anybody the illusion that we're there, but hopefully we can get 50 of us to come to an agreement. With that, let me call on Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Leader Schumer. I'm proud to be here with these members who have fought for so valiantly for voting rights. This week, many of you were there. I go back to that day, the officers with the scratched faces, people standing between us and death, the members in that room, and then at the very end, when Senator Blunt and myself and Vice President Pence walked down that long walk with strewn glass on all sides, spray-painted columns, with the 2 young women with the mahogany box filled with the last electoral ballots ending in Wyoming. And I vowed at that moment that this can never happen again, and that so much of our country and our foundation of our country and the reputation of our nation around the world is about this peaceful transition of democracy, and that we are a democracy we should be proud of. And in the words of, I think it was President Biden that quoted Bob Dole at Bob Dole's funeral, he once said, when looking at civil rights legislation, no first-class democracy can treat people like second-class citizens. So that's what this is about. And I think you know that what happened that day really didn't end that day. I naively thought on that beautiful blue sky inauguration with all of the leaders of both parties up on that stage that the torch had been passed and that this was behind us. Far from the truth. Over 400 bills introduced across the country. We have bayonets replaced by legislation that basically says you can't vote on weekends in the last month, as Senator Warnock will tell you, in Georgia, or that you can't register to vote, or that the bill that was passed in Wisconsin, which was by one person's veto pen, and that would be Governor Evers, would have been put into law that meant 1 ballot drop-off box in the entire city of Milwaukee, or votes not certified or counted, or nonpartisan ballot commissions replaced by partisan state legislatures. That's what's going on. The Freedom to Vote Act sets basic federal minimum standards that says it's safe to vote, that you don't have to go get a notary public in the middle of a pandemic in order to get in a mail-in ballot, which is exactly what you have to do right now in South Carolina. Basic minimal standards that are consistent with the U.S. Constitution that says that Congress can make or alter federal election laws. So that's what the focus is. I will let my colleagues answer and talk about the rules. I think we all know the answer there. The rules have been changed many times, and what we're talking about here is not getting rid of the filibuster, as much as I would personally do that, but we are talking about restoring the Senate to allow major issues of the day to be debated, and this is clearly one of them. Thank you.
There are 2 basic types of governments in the world. One is the power flows down from those at the top, the dictator, the authoritarian leader, the military leader. And then there's our beautiful democratic republic where power flows up from the people. This just goes to the heart of every American. We start out our Constitution, we the people. We talk about the ballot box as the pulsating heart of our country. So it's no wonder we come back to this moment time and time again, defending the sacred right of every citizen to vote. As we ponder the discussion we're in now, I keep having 2 images come back to my mind. And one is John Lewis leading that band of 600 up Edmund Pettus Bridge to encounter the state troopers in Alabama. and being willing to take that beating and show up for protests and march time and time thereafter, because it mattered so much. Because if you have the power to vote, you have the power to be listened to. You have the power to participate. And if you don't have the vote, you're on the sidelines and you're ignored. And then we have, in that same year, 1965, Lyndon Johnson signing that bill, and he said the most powerful instrument ever devised is the power to vote. It's the most powerful instrument for creating justice. So here we are in another chapter of this ongoing battle. And we can't even get a bill to the floor of the U.S. Senate to discuss it. This is just beyond unacceptable in a republic, that the legislative body can't even start the bill, can't even start entertaining amendments. So here we are looking at the perversion of something that in its best format was the ability to hold an extended discussion so that every voice in the Senate could be heard, so that there was leverage to seek compromise, so that there was leverage to seek amendments. It has been perverted into a veto that means the minority in America make the decisions, not the majority. We need to restore the vision of extended debate where every senator is heard, but no senator has a veto, so that we can address the most important issue in a republic, protection of the ballot box.
Senator Padilla. He's senior by three seconds.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and say to each one of you, actually, that I hope you're okay, and that it's okay to not be okay. This Thursday is a harsh anniversary. 1 year since not just a violent, but a deadly insurrection here in the nation's capital. As Senator Klobuchar said, the violence and the damage done by the Dig Lie did not end on that day. I also want to remind us that it did not start on that day either. The insurrection of last January 6th was a long time in coming. Now, I approach my reflections on January 6th with a slightly different perspective. First, I was not here on that day. I was in transition. It was the morning after the election of Senators Warnock and Ossoff in Georgia, 2 weeks after the appointment for me to join the U.S. Senate had been announced by Governor Newsom in California, and 2 weeks before we were sworn in. Where was I that day? I was at home. I was in full-on transition, closing out business at the Secretary of State's office in California, interviewing potential staff on a Zoom, right? So 2020, when my wife interrupted me, which she never does. And she said, Alex, there's something happening in Washington. You need to finish that Zoom. You need to come watch TV and see what's going on. And so from the outside looking in, I had, I wouldn't call it an advantage, but the unique perspective of seeing the split screen. The efforts to certify the election results happening inside the chambers and the violence mounting outside. And just as the insurrectionists were breaching the United States Capitol, our 3 children came downstairs. See, it was the first week of January. They weren't back in school yet. They certainly weren't back in school in person because of the pandemic. Now my boys have been here to Washington, D.C., and they've been to this Capitol. They know what it represents. And they saw the violence that day, and they know that I was transitioning into a new job. And they asked me, really, Dad? That's where you're going? We're having a tough time reconciling what happened that day and what it meant and what we need to do about it as adults. Imagine trying to explain that to our children. the next generation for our nation. And so to the best of my ability, I explained that, yes, I'm going there to work. And I'm now going there with more purpose and more resolve for the sake of our democracy and for the sake of future generations to be able to live the American dream. Now, I also approach this date, again, evidence of the dangers of the big lie, after having served as California Secretary of State for 6 years. You know, when I ran for Secretary of State in California, soon after the Shelby v. Holder decision by the Supreme Court is when I announced my candidacy. It's because of my fundamental belief in voting rights and the ability for any eligible American to easily register to vote, stay registered to vote, be able to cast their ballot, and have their ballot counted as cast without any unnecessary obstacles or barriers. What a concept. And so I enthusiastically have been part of the group that has negotiated what is now the Freedom to Vote Act, because the reforms called for in this measure are not just ideas that we think are good and we're going to cross our fingers and hope they work. They're proven best practices, reforms that have been implemented in state after state, both red states and blue states, along with, I guess, some purple states you can call them, that show that you can make it easier for eligible Americans to register to vote, stay registered to vote, cast their ballot, and, by the way, strengthen the integrity of our elections in the process. It's not an either or. We can facilitate participation, strengthen election integrity. That's what we're seeking to do. That is what our nation needs us to do as part of a comprehensive effort to ensure that a deadly insurrection in the nation's capital to interrupt a peaceful transition of power never happens again. And it is with that perspective, and it is with that passion, that I say if we need to change some rules in the Senate to make it so, then that's what we need to do. The stakes are too high. And so, Leader Schumer, I want to thank you for your leadership in keeping this a front-burner issue and for involving me in this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. You've done a great job as part of the team. Senator Warnock.
Happy New Year, everyone, and thank you, Senator Schumer, for your leadership on this issue, and to all of my colleagues, thank you so very much. Let's be really clear. Our democracy is imperiled, and time is running out. This is a moral moment, and if we fail to protect the voices and the votes of the American people, then we have fallen way short of our responsibility as members of this body. In the state of Georgia right now, as the state legislature comes together for a new session, there is an effort to get rid of every drop box in the state. Think about that. In the middle of a pandemic, with the Omicron variant, and we don't know what the days ahead will bring, something that their duty is to get rid of drop boxes. What will that do for rural voters who are trying to exercise their vote? What about workers on the night shift? It's very clear what the Republican Party is up to. They are trying to make it harder for some people to vote and easier to cheat. We're trying to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. And I predict that over the next few days, you're going to hear the same Republicans give a lot of lip service to bipartisanship. I believe in bipartisanship. I'd like to see us participate in a bipartisan way, which is why I had hoped they would have allowed us to have a debate on the voting bills that are in front of us. That's what they blocked 3 times in the Senate, our ability to have a bipartisan debate about an issue that the American people are debating over right now. I don't usually do this, but I happen to be sitting in the chair presiding over the Senate this morning when one of my colleagues from Texas, Senator Cornyn, began to attack our efforts to push forward these reasonable voting laws. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the For the People, the Freedom to Vote Act, and he tried to mischaracterize what we're doing. Let me be very clear. The elections are still run by the states. We're just trying to provide a federal baseline that says everybody ought to have access, every eligible American has to have access to the ballot. And I find it ironic, I don't usually do this, but I find it ironic that the senator from Texas would stand here and push against these proposals and give lip service to bipartisanship when members of the state legislature in Texas had to come here just a few months ago to break quorum to keep their colleagues from passing some of the most repressive voting anti-democratic measures that we've seen in the state of Texas in a long time. Members of his own legislature had to come here, leave their families, leave their children, to keep them from passing these terrible voter suppression bills, which are not bipartisan. They're not bipartisan in Texas. They're not bipartisan in Georgia. And then at the same time, they're saying to us, we can't pass these because, you know, this happens at the state level. I'm the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King Jr. preached. And I take great umbrage when members of this body would use old, trite states' rights arguments, the same kinds of states' rights arguments that were used against Dr. King back then to push against reasonable access to the ballot right now. And many of these same politicians will stand up in just a few days and they will give lip service to Martin Luther King Jr. Well, you cannot remember Dr. King and dismember his legacy at the same time. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the Freedom to Vote Act, is the legacy of Dr. King, and if you would give lip service to his name, you need to find yourself on the right side of history, pushing to get these bills done. And so I urge my colleagues to do the right thing. If those on the other side refuse to do it, the Democrats will have to act alone. But by all means, we have to act. Dr. King's words are as true now as they were back then. Justice delayed is justice denied. Time is running out. Let's get the job done.
And I think you can see the passion that our caucus has on this by the superb eloquence of all four of the speakers here, each in her or his own way. Yes?
Leader Schumer, would you consider doing the Electoral Count Act in exchange or instead of the Freedom to Vote Act?
That makes no sense. If you're going to rig the game and then say, oh, we'll count the rigged game accurately, what good is that? They want to now both rig the game and rig the count. But to just say, we won't rig the count, but we're going to rig the game, makes no sense whatsoever.
What exactly are the proposals for changing the vote? How similar it is to maybe something?
There are many different proposals out there, and our caucus is discussing them. There have been lots of serious discussions, frankly, with Senator Manchin on different proposals, and he's entertaining them. He hasn't. I don't want to give people the illusion that he said he'd be for any of them at this point. It's a long, hard struggle. But we are engaging in that struggle with the hope that we can all come together because of the reasons that were cited here. Our democracy is at risk. Yes, we're going in order.
Thank you, Senator. January 6th, as all of you have noted, is very much upon us. And I just wonder what kinds of briefings have you had on the threats? What is the reality of the threat? And how confident are you that this building is safe, will be safe on Thursday?
Okay, we're in much better shape than we were a year ago. The intelligence, which was so poor then, is much better now. We have links. We passed legislation to link our Capitol Police with the National Guards. We have a new chief of police who is doing an outstanding job, and Amy's going to have him testify tomorrow at the Rules Committee. So yes, I believe we are much safer, but we got to keep working at it. We got to keep making it safer and safer and safer. But there's no doubt we are a far cry from where we were a year ago. We are in much better shape. Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Okay. Senator Blunt and Senator Portman and Peters and I did that bipartisan report. I suggest you all look at it before tomorrow morning when we have the hearing. And we felt we couldn't wait. The effort in the House is, of course, just as important to look at what's the underlying causes and the accountability. But this was about the immediate security at the Capitol. Since then, Senator Schumer, with his leadership, we have a new sergeant-at-arms in the Senate. We have a new sergeant-at-arms in the House. We have a new police chief. We passed the bill at the end of the year that President Biden signed into law, allowing the new police chief to quickly call into the National Guard if that's needed. Better intelligence sharing. The haunting words of the police officer on the police radio in the middle of the insurrection after people had already been killed that said, "Does anyone have a plan?" There was no operational plan of any significance that day. That has changed with the new chief's leadership as you look at the events of the summer. And then finally, the equipment. 75% of them were in plain clothes. There were literally insurrectionists that had better protection than some of the officers did. And that was the funding under Senator Schumer's leadership, Senator Leahy's, that we got done this summer, which allows for more funding for their equipment, more funding for their benefits, and of course the challenges ahead of filling the vacancies that are right now we see in the police department and police departments across the country. That is a lot about these benefits and the chief's plan to recruit people and get retention bonuses and the like, and also the threats against members, which is directly tied to what my colleagues have been talking about. 9,000 at the latest count from last year alone, double or triple what they've been in before. The threats against the election officials, which includes, by the way, a former election official, Republican in Philadelphia, who had his house, his kids' names, his address put on the internet. Threats against Katie Hobbs in Arizona, hunting her down. Those are the kinds of things that are happening now. So yes, the security is important, but it is tied directly to the work we're doing now to preserve our democracy.
Yes.
You've spoken about having a plethora of options on reforming the filibuster during the Senate. Can you offer any more specific?
No. We're discussing them in private with Senators Manchin, Senator Sinema, and before we vote on them, or whichever one we've arrived at, you'll hear and see about it. Yes.
What do you hear Manchin say it's a heavy lift and he wants Republicans involved and he can't see doing it if he can't see taking the nuclear option approach? So he doesn't see that as a possibility or a likelihood.
Look, Manchin has said all along he wants to deal with Republicans, and we have all been very patient. In August, we came up with, all of us here, along with Senators Tester, Kaine, King, and Manchin, came up with the Freedom to Vote Act, and he said, just give me a chance. This is something I think I can convince Republicans on, and you saw the results. They wouldn't go anywhere. So Manchin, of course, would prefer to deal with Republicans, but I believe he knows that we will not get any Republican cooperation, and we're continuing to have talks as to how we can do this in changing the rules. There are certain things he won't go for, but there are certain things he's talking about. Yes?
There's been $82 billion appropriated for testing. Given the testing shortages you've seen in your own home state of New York and across the country, what specifically do you think the Biden administration did not do to adequately?
Look, I think that they are doing a good job in terms of getting the tests out. I've asked that more tests be coming to New York. They've sent them there. And look what happened. COVID came back with a fervor in a far wider way than we've known. But I think the Biden administration is doing a good job on testing. Yes, no, next question.
Senator Manchin says
No, no. Look, I've talked to Senator Manchin numerous times during the break. Most of the discussions were on voting rights, but we did touch on BBB. And I believe the Biden administration will be having discussions with Manchin, with his cooperation and participation on BBB as we move forward. Last one.
With the Omicron variant and the Capitol Physician's letter yesterday, do you anticipate any changes on the Senate side to how the floor is run, or any changes to
Look, we try to go by the science. We try to go by what the Capitol Physician says, and that will continue to do that. Thank you, everybody.
Why not do a mask mandate?
Yeah, can't you get a Republican